Hey guys, Robert here, and today I have, first time in quite a while, I have my special guest, Mark Russell.
Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Not too bad, and well, right off the bat, got someone from my friend Tristan asking, Mark, now that we've seen the advancement of AI and the rise of the demonization of the LGBTQ community, you wrote Not a Robot, did you think it was going to end up being a prophecy?
No, but I find that I'm increasingly outflanked by reality.
So I just wanted to bring that up.
I have yet to prove too pessimistic. I think.
Yep, she just asked that, so I figured why do it. But yeah, Mark, you've been working in the comic industry a long time. Tell us what got you into comic and how did comics and what got you started in the industry?
Well, what got me into comics originally was Mad Magazine. Uh,
What? Me worry?
yeah, right. That was like sort of my first love, and I still like when I think back to like those 6-page parodies that they
Mm-hmm.
did of actual films or of other
Yep.
like stories. I think those are oftentimes better told stories than the things they're parodying because they had to be sort of tight and pithy and sort of reduced to its essence. So I think in a lot of ways that sort of informed my style. Like I wanted things
Sorry, I
to
just had to
seem.
point that out. Your
Oh,
door opened by itself. Totally not creepy.
it was not by itself. My cat did that.
I had a feeling it was a pet that was out of view.
It's not haunted, for those who are wondering. But or it may be haunted, but we also have a cat. But yeah, so I think that what got me into writing comics was to be honest, just the fact they offered to let me write one because I had
Mm-hmm.
written books, prose books beforehand,
Ah.
uh, and I had always imagined that was why they offered to let me write prez was because they had found my DC had found my books and they liked them, but it wasn't until like years later I was giving my origin story at a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, and Marie Javins, who was the editor who discovered me and is now the
Mm-hmm.
editor in chief at DC. But at the time, we were both sort of newbies at DC Comics, and she was in the audience on my panel, and she stood up and said, "That's not true." And so I invited her up to the panel. Well, I was as interested as anyone else. How did I
Mm-hmm.
get into comics? And she said it had nothing to do with your books. I had noticed this Count Chocula fan fiction you had been writing on Facebook, which is about as obscure and abstruse a way to get into comics as any. I wish I had better story for people. I wish there's
That's
more
funny. No, that is a great story. That's a great story.
duplicable.
That is so funny.
But
It's
for
that,
anyone
that
sitting at home with a notebook, like this is how I'm going to break. I'm going to see their eyes rolling. Like, so
but yeah,
yeah,
speaking of what's Prez, I mean, for those who don't know what Prez is, give people the Clip Notes version of Prez.
Prez is about the first teenage president. It
Mm-hmm.
takes place in the future when a series of legislative changes allow teenagers to run for president, as well as corporations,
Right.
and also sort of this sort of there's this keyhole that happens when the electoral college cannot agree on a president, which allows this suddenly viral teenager
Mm-hmm.
known to the public as Corn Dog Girl to slip
Mm-hmm.
through the net and become uh, the next president of the United States.
Right.
And this was, written back in a time when we imagined having an amateur in the White House would be a good thing.
Yep. And to be fair, you were just taking an idea, a concept that's been around for a long time. Prez goes way back. You
Yeah,
just redeveloped it for a modern day, and
right. It
yeah.
was started in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Simon was one of the creators of the original Prez. Only ran for about 3 or 4 issues,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of it was, fueled by hippie fear,
Yeah.
because it was, I think, a response to. I mean, 18-year-olds had just been given the right to vote,
Mm-hmm.
so I think a lot of it was in the early '70s. The idea by the older generations that, oh well, great, we're going to have like hippies being elected president now, and we're going to have
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know like uh, like rock bands playing on the south lawn of the White House. Can you imagine?
Right.
More pedestrian. So it reflected a lot of that. So what I wanted to do was update it so that it was more about the sort of angst and sort of fears that we have about where politics is going now.
Right.
or at least
And
the
yep,
fears we had in 2015.
right. Oh boy, and then the fears now, oh boy. But
Yeah,
then of course you did a backup story during the Catwoman election night, and oh hell yeah, give us Birdie. That's what Trisha just said. But yeah, you did a backup story as well in here, and it was a nice little story, just tying alongside with what was going on in here. But then after Prez, if I remember right afterward would be your Flintstones, correct?
that's right.
Yep, and this really was so good. I just love how you reimagined Flintstones for well the modern Stone family, but made it more modern. I love how you didn't go too much into explaining stuff. Like they have a television. You don't explain beyond it, and that's why they're like, "Oh, wall demon." Wait, how would it work? Who
Yeah.
cares?
You have to leave something for the suspension of disbelief. You know.
Exactly. But but yeah, it only lasted about 12, well, 13 issues adding on with this with the
Yeah.
special.
When we started writing, when we started doing the Flintstones, Marie, my editor, said we never really discussed this, but how many of these issues are you interested in writing?
Mhm.
And I knew from my experience with Prez that it could be canceled at any moment,
Right.
and which was a new and strange experience to me, having something canceled in the middle of a run, because
Mhm.
nobody ever had canceled one of my books, halfway through writing it.
Right.
So I asked her. I said, "Well, based upon the sales of number one, how long do you think we could go with the Flintstones before it got canceled?" And she said, "Probably about 12 issues." So I said, "Well,
Mhm.
let's do a 12-issue run then. We'll plan on 12." And luckily, it turned out to be a bigger title than we had imagined it would be.
Mhm.
It did pretty well, but we
Very well.
still had sort of had in our minds like we're going to do 12 and get out, which I like doing now. I think it's good to have an endpoint in mind when you're writing something, because not only does it allow you to conceive of it as a succinct story,
Mhm.
but it gives you some light at the end of the tunnel. Uh,
Exactly. And of
when
course, you would then do yep. And then you would do the back and the bonus story for the Booster Gold crossover. And this was just a lot of fun, just all this stuff here. And my favorite bit has to be, of course, the ending. Like, let's do it again, please no, or whatever. I'll stick around. Like, I just love how Fred is just so blunt, saying like, just go, just go. But one thing I love about all throughout this whole book was the your handling on religion, which would tie into your second coming, and just this notion of because I've heard some people basically say, I've heard some people believe that you're poking fun at religion and all that. But when I look at it and I read this, I'm like, it's not so much you're poking fun at it, it's that you're taking out the bad side of religion, like the people on the higher ups and everything, and you're getting to the true meaning of what religion, the importance of religion.
Yeah, I believe that religion's important, and I think
Exactly.
that we all need to believe that we're a part of something bigger than ourselves, and that we need to feel like our existence was not a mistake. So it's not really I never really satirized religion or
Right.
spirituality. What I satirized are the institutions that sort of
Exactly.
creep up around it, who instead of becoming an asset to your spiritual life, try to turn
Hmm.
your spiritual life into an asset of their church or
Exactly.
their business.
Exactly, which is why I just love this when asked like, why do you believe in it? Like, do you like, is he real? It's like he's real. We need him to be. And then the joke, of course, they replaced Gerald with God. So in a lot of like, I just that cracks me up every time. It's like we can't fit in. Huh. So, let's just trim it
Well, it
down,
was really
abbreviate
supposed
it.
to be in microcosm, like a brief history of the of religions in general, like how
Hmm.
we moved from animism because we noticed the birds were going from water sources, going south for the winter and north for the summer. We realized that there were these sort of atavistic forces in nature that we
Hmm.
sort of theicized, and then went from that to like idol worship. Like there's this
Right.
physical, tangible object, which is not necessarily a force of nature, but it's something we created, and we're focusing our worship on that. But these
Yes.
religions tend to be, easily dispelled, or there's a whole book of the Apocrypha called Bel and the Dragon, which is about
Hmm.
Joseph, or not Joseph, I'm sorry, Daniel, prophet Daniel in the Bible, dispelling the native gods of the Babylonians, and they
Right.
have this god named Baal, who
Hmm.
they lay out a bunch of food for it at night, and when they come in the morning, all the food is gone. So they think, well, this is proof that the idol Baal is eating the food. So Daniel like powders the floor with sawdust, and then one night, and then when they come back in the morning, they see footprints in the dust, and they're
Hmm.
leading to the secret chamber, the secret door inside the chamber that holds the idol, and they realize that the priests have been coming in and getting the food and eating it.
Oh no.
So it's sort of like how, and so then you have to go from this sort of idol worship, because these things can be sort of debunked, to sort of a more abstract God. And I think the
Right.
abstract sort of invisible God is the one that's most meaningful to people,
Right.
because it is
Definitely.
one that you can sort of imbue with your own sort of needs the
Hmm.
most.
Yep. Now, one other question. At the beginning, end of the first issue, you actually did do a skip to the present day, but you wouldn't do that again afterwards. How
Yeah.
tempting was that for you to want to keep jumping around between then and present day, or was that always meant to be a one-time thing?
No, I'd originally envisioned it that there was going to be these people in the present day, and in fact, I originally thought each issue would begin with a history of natural museum in the present day, looking at
Hmm.
some artifact from like bedrock, and then that sort of kicking off the story for that issue. But it was kind of an unwieldy premise, because I didn't always have the space to have a page or two
Right.
to go back, and it just felt kind of unnecessary to the story.
True.
So I sort of disabused myself of that device really
Right.
quickly.
Now, after that, you then eventually also did the Snagglepuss Chronicles, starting with a backup in this. But yeah, and this ended up being more or less using Snagglepuss to give a commentary on history, but still tell a fun story as well. And Tristan's been bringing up in the comments how her back in the past made fun of stuff like Wonder Twins and the Harley book, and she was apologizing. She even said earlier, I apologize for 2016 me.
I think, yeah, it's okay. We all had it. We're all probably very different people than we were in 2016.
Yep.
So
But
no
yeah,
problem. And
but yeah.
people don't have to like it. It's
Hmm.
okay. I write for the people who do like it, and people come to different things at different points in their life, so that's fine.
Right. But yeah, but with this though, like it really captivated me. I'm like, it's not what I was expecting from Snagglepuss, but at the same time, the story you told, it's kind of similar to what I've said about with Second Coming. Because I had a debate with someone before saying like it was written like a comedy, and I'm like, well, if it even was a comedy, okay, it didn't work as a comedy for me, but it's kind of like Kevin Smith's Dogma. Now, granted, that made me laugh more so, but at the same time, it's like it made me think. And when it makes me think, I will appreciate the story if it makes me think. And that's similar with this. The story here really made me think about, everything that was going on with Snagglepuss throughout all this. And it just felt like such a trauma. But I also love the backup story, how it opens up with that whole story of it's fire, it flames even, and everyone laughing. If I recall right, that was a real event that happened, and unfortunately was a tragedy just as much.
Yeah, it was actually based upon this parable that Kierkegaard
Right.
once told about how he had this parable about this a fire breaking out in a theater, and the clown running out to tell everybody there was a fire backstage, and everyone thinking it was part of the act and laughing. And it was a parable supposed to demonstrate, it was supposed to be about himself, about
Right.
how he was warning people that the theater was burning, but he was such a cartoonish figure, or he was so used to not being taken seriously, that people didn't take him seriously when he was being serious. And it's sort of the same thing, where
Exactly.
I think the metaphor for modern, or for 20th century America, would be that there were very real dangers with McCarthyism and with the threat of nuclear annihilation in the 50s. But the people warning about us weren't taken seriously, because they were all entertainers.
Right. Exactly. But like I said, throughout the main story, though, just you add in all the Snaggleputt isms and everything, but at the same time, it's a different character. But I that's what appealed to me. It was the story of this character through it being the face of Snagglepuss. I mean, was that kind of what you were going for, or what were you going for exactly with this story? I'm
That's a good
curious.
question. I'm not sure I know myself, but I know that I wanted what I really knew about Snagglepuss was one that he had a background in theater because
Mm-hmm.
both his catchphrases, "Exit stage left"
Exit, stay left.
and "Heavens to Murgatroyd," both of them are theater phrases.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew he had a background in theater, and I also knew that he was a gay icon. So I kind of
That's
built
very
the story
true. That's very true.
around those two pillars.
Mm-hmm.
It's like why would he not be in theater now while he's doing the cartoons, and how would that relate to being a gay icon? And what I came up with was a story about the lavender scare in the 50s, uh,
Mm-hmm.
where they're trying to like extort uh, gay creators to like get them to play ball with the House Un-American activities,
Mm-hmm.
ruin their careers.
Yep. And then, of course, you eventually played up a follow up to that with the Green Lantern Huckleberry Hound, where you played off with Huckleberry Hound's son and everything. And that was also, I mean, was that also intentional to do that? Like you thought, oh, I'll take this and make a follow up, or was that did it just come into play like that?
It really was kind of I wanted to do if they let me do another run of Snagglepuss, or let me pick up where the story left off, it would have been followed Huckleberry Hound's son,
Right.
who shows up at the end and becomes like what we know as Huckleberry Hound from the
Right.
cartoons. It would have followed his career. So this was basically me doing a one-off, what
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to have done in like a series.
Right. And again, that was just a very interesting, just a different era, of course, but still very good. And oh, Thomas just brought up an interesting joke. I think I know which one. The joke about the two preachers and how they say how much money for them and for God. I know this joke. It's
I know.
they put in a circle. Whatever money falls out of the circle, goes to the God, and the other goes to church. No, no, it's the other way. They're like, no, no, we throw them up in the air, and whatever God wants, He keeps. I remember that from Short Circuit.
Yeah.
That's always a great joke. But yeah, of course. Then after that, you then did Lex Luthor, Porky Pig, and this. I'll be honest. It didn't strike me as good until I went over with a friend of mine for my pro teachers noob show, and he gave it more of the context of the satire and everything. And now I really do appreciate all of this, everything going on in here. I mean, I still have a few issues here and there, but nothing's perfect. But I just love it. Everything was Porky, just this whole, you know, like he's in over his head. He doesn't realize he's being used, and then Lex is just using him as a fall guy.
Right. That's the most important thing, I think, when you are going to break the law in
Yeah,
corporate finance, is to have somebody that you can fire. I think that's what usually the compliance officer is like the person you can blame when
exactly.
you're out of compliance.
And that's the irony is that that's exactly what Porky does, and he ends up
Yeah,
being in the same one. He ends up firing the immigrant, and then it turns out, well, he's the same thing for Lex to do,
yeah,
just
that
throw under the
storyline
bus.
about the janitor is kind of
Yeah.
like a metaphor for I think what happens. The anti-immigrant sentiment in America, which is most people realize they're getting screwed at work, they're getting screwed by their boss or by the economy, but there's
Hmm.
nothing they can do about that. They can't do anything about their boss or about the way the
Exactly.
economy has been structured into this sort of shell game. But they can do some. They can do something about the janitor that has absolutely no political power. So they
Exactly.
take it out on the immigrant, and I think it is a microcosm sort of about how we have transferred a very real sort of fears about losing our place in society onto those who aren't really the ones stealing it from us,
Right.
but whom don't have the political power to defend themselves.
Exactly. But yeah, and then of course Lex being very Steve Jobs like and everything. That was just a brilliant. I'm like, why hasn't anyone done that before? But and that's what you were going for, right? A Steve
Yeah.
Jobs like tone.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, sort of, and not specifically Steve Jobs, but more sort of like a tech CEO for
Right,
a
right.
generic amalgam of all the tech CEOs.
Right. But I just love it. And of course, with Daffy, poor Daffy, he's just being a troll. And then he ends up getting like, oh dear. But of course, it's Lex. If he's like that, just that driven to anyone who crosses him. He mostly does the Superman.
Right.
Daffy just pushed his buttons too much.
Daffy got Elon Musk, you know, long before
Exactly.
Elon Musk owned Twitter.
Yep. But yeah, then you would do now. I gotta ask, where is your stance on with Superman? Since you did a couple of the backup stories in here, I'm just curious in general. Because I always am curious on any writers handling on Superman and what's their views on him.
Well, my view on Superman is I think that a lot of there's a lot of people think he's boring because he's like the blue boy
Oh,
scout.
I've heard that. I've heard that so much.
But I feel like the things that these people find boring about are what makes him interesting to me. To me,
Hmm.
the real superpower that he has is not flight or super strength or invulnerability. It's the ability to have all that power and somehow still be a decent person.
Yes, exactly,
And so that's the
exactly,
story I want to tell. It's like, how does this guy manage to not become Caligula? And
exactly.
right, to me, that's much more fascinating than sort of any professional wrestling with capes on, or just this guy teaming up with people to fight other people.
Exactly, and that was definitely something I saw in both of these stories. Um, then, of course, I think one of the things Tristan was bringing up about was this issue of Harley Quinn, and the quite. I think some people who, if they knew about it, knew what you were mocking throughout this issue,
Yeah,
and was and yeah, I gotta say, it makes me laugh looking back at it now because trust me, I have no love for that community anymore. So
yeah,
it's
it
just
was
seeing.
probably more heavy-handed than I would write something now. It was because it was directly going after a thing that was happening in comics
Yep,
back then, still happening,
still
but it's
happening. Yep.
probably more of a direct sort of heavy-handed issue than I would write now. It's not. I don't think it's my best work.
Oh yeah.
Um, but
Just
but
yeah.
you are who you are who you were in a way. So it's
Exactly.
like
Exactly.
we all grow and realize. I think this is what makes like E.L. Doctorow has a great quote, which I
Hmm.
sort of lean on when I look back on my failures. And he said, "There's no such thing as a good writer. There's only bad writers who didn't quit."
That worked. That's a good quote. That's a good quote.
But I feel like that's also a good recipe for becoming a better human being, right?
Hmm.
You there's only bad people who just get better as they go along because they
Exactly.
are willing to say, "Oh, well, I screwed up." So I I I'm open to like letting people, even the people I'm satirizing, giving them the freedom to change and
Hmm.
grow, just as I have.
Exactly. Exactly. Then of course you did three of those Year of the Villain one shots. I mean, how fun was that getting to do Riddler and Sinestro, and of course you already had experience with Harley, but doing the Villain of the Year, which we'll get to that. But I'm curious on these two first. Like
I really
how.
like those the year of the villain thing because they let me just write them as independent stories. They didn't really have to tie into anything,
Hmm.
only in the most general ways. And so they allowed me sort of like talk more about sort of the existential crises that these villains have about
Hmm.
what it means to be the Riddler or what it means to be Sinestro.
Yeah, definitely. And I like also you kind of was it intention to give a little tease to your Sinestro one there when you had this moment here? Was that meant to be a bit of a artistic tease because Sinestro's on the cover?
No, that was actually that was artist choice. I don't think I
Ah,
actually wrote
Scott, good.
Sinestro into
Ah,
that
because
script.
that was just so ironic that you went on to do that. And
Yeah.
yeah, but of course, in the year villain of the year special, I crack up at it, especially Flamingo. Why
And
Flamingo?
the most random villain. I think the main reason why I chose him to be the main villain was because one, he just has a really cool look to him.
Hmm.
Uh, he looks like Prince.
He does.
And also because at the time I had been nominated for a few awards but hadn't won any, so I
Hmm.
kind of felt like he did. So I could pull my own sort of frustration of like
Exactly.
being
And
stuck
then
eating a dry chicken dinner while other people were winning awards.
right. And how much of this also was you putting in any of your own commentary on what had been going on in DC, like the stuff with Flashpoint Batman and everything? It just again felt like you're satirizing what's currently going on. Like, were you just given that freedom to do that, or how did that
Yeah,
play out? Yep.
I think that you can't really write something like that without taking a few pot shots at, sort of what the cliches of not only the industry but the specific publisher you're writing about.
Hmm.
Ironically, that was probably the best thing I ever wrote for DC, or the best, not the best thing, but the best selling thing I ever
Hmm.
wrote for DC. It sold better than anything else I did before or since.
Well, better than even Space Age.
As far as I know, I don't have the numbers
Oh,
on the books, but
yeah, but
maybe
this
maybe when all is said and done, Space Age will
probably
sell.
because the people actually voting on it is probably what helped. Because if I
Yeah,
weren't
I think
actual
that was
votes,
is sort of like has a sort of unfair advantage because people actually have to read it to vote on who's going to be the villain.
exactly, and of course the big winner being the main villain at the time, the
Yeah,
Batman Who Laughs.
big surprise.
Yeah, what a shocker. Now, of course, you had now. Was this your first Marvel, or did you start doing other Marvels by this point?
No, that was the very first Marvel title I wrote.
Yeah, the Snapshot book. Which, how did this come about? Like, what was the edicts with these Snapshot books?
Kurt Busiek was curating the Snapshot series, and so he
Mm-hmm.
approached me about writing that one. And he already had sort of the loose outline for a story that he wanted to tell.
Ah,
So I pretty much was just hired to bring that story to life. But
oh,
yeah, really, he was the one that came up with the general story idea.
I had no idea on that because I wasn't sure exactly how this worked when they did this. So yeah, that's very informative to hear about that because I love Kurt Busiek stuff on Marvels and everything.
Yeah, he
So,
was really, and one of the the best experiences I've had in comics was just sort of like getting to talk to him
hmm,
about this and like see how he made comics and listen to him because I was still fairly new in comics when I wrote that, and so just listening to this guy who's done it all, like sort of like tell me how to make a big two comic. I think I really learned a lot just by working on one issue with him. I probably learned more working on one issue with Kurt Busiek than I did, my previous, 2 years or whatever in comics.
right. Then of course now, well, any of the books that what we've missed going over, we'll do at the very end. Just trying to get through what I have, but. Then you had Superman vs. Imperious Lex, the only of the Future State books that went 1 month beyond all the others. But how did this story come on about?
DC approached me when they were doing the future state, and they said we want to do the only directive they gave me is that they wanted a story where set on Lexor, the planet
Hmm.
where Lex Luthor uh, is basically king. So I crafted the story around that, and it's really a story. It's sort of a various each issue is sort of a metaphor for a different thing in current events. Like I think Brexit and
Right.
the refugee crisis that was happening at the time, and
Hmm.
so yeah, it allowed me to like write about current events in through the veil of science fiction, which I think was really what all science fiction is.
Yeah, definitely. I
Even
mean, look at
something
Star
like
Trek.
Lord of the Rings, was about Tolkien's experiences in the First
Yep.
World War, and
Yep, definitely. Or Narnia with Lewis
yeah.
and everything. But yeah, and was it meant to be the 2 issues and it got expanded to the three, or did they give you however much you needed?
No, we had always planned for 3 issues.
Ah, because that always interests me. Because I know you had the 4 issues that were two a month, and then there were the 2 issues. This was the only one that was a 3 issue one. That's why
Yeah,
I
I
was
think
saying
it's
that.
because the story I came back to them with
Hmm.
worked best as a three-parter.
Right. And then of course after that on my list and what I have still from you was the Super Pets backup stuff in Urban Legends. How did this story come on about?
Uh, I was approached to write a Batman story for Urban Legends, and I
Hmm.
wanted to do something that explored Batman's relationship with Ace, and something not where like where they had to sort of save each other,
Hmm.
where they both at one point in the story or another have to save each other. Because I wanted to be about how really it's not just Batman or this superhero or that superhero saving the world. It's really about the world saving superheroes as much as it is about superheroes saving us. About how what saves the world is the connections,
Hmm.
the love we develop for each other, not necessarily one person having a ton of power and the other people powerless around them, sort of you know, supplicating themselves before this giant.
Yep. And understandable. And that was a very interesting story. I mean, I enjoyed it, felt it was entertaining. Not the greatest story, but again, I'm being honest, saying that I'm being honest, and I feel comfortable being able to be honest about that, saying like because
Yeah,
you know some writers have hits, they have misses.
I like that one a lot. I'll stand by
Oh,
that one all
oh,
day long.
hey,
But it's
that's
okay.
perfectly
I
fine.
realize that not everybody enjoys everything. It's
But what
okay.
I have loved was Space Age. Hey, I decided and everything at Grand Rapids, and this you and I talked about this before, but obviously we're going to repeat it here. This was originally meant to be a 5G book, but that fell by the wayside and became something completely original. Explain to people about that.
Yeah, so originally what we were going to do was a 20 to 21 page or 20 to 21 issue story of Superman from like 1965 to
Hmm.
1985. And each issue was going to be a year and it was going to come out with the 5G thing. And this was going to be the 2G Superman.
Right.
But when the whole 5G thing fell apart, we sort of had to pivot and reconsider the story, which I think really helped it because instead of doing, sort of chaining ourselves to this idea that we're doing one issue per year, it was going to be 3 books, 80
Hmm.
pages each, and each one dealing with a decade. So it allowed me to tell a much more fluid, much more cohesive story that way.
Right. And of course, this ended up being a story that in a lot of ways, as I brought it up to you before, it's one of the different Earths that we never saw destroyed during Crisis on Infinite Earths. What made
Right.
you decide to go put it in that direction?
Well, one, I could tell the story I wanted to tell. It wasn't didn't have to be beholden to like the official DC canon because I really
Right.
wanted to tell a story about the DC characters having origins and running into each other the way it would have happened against the backdrop of our real history. In this
Hmm.
book, they're all sort of created by the same crisis of the Cold War immediately following Kennedy's death around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and
Right.
so I wanted that to be sort of like what causes like both Batman and Superman and Green Lantern and Lex Luthor to all sort of like become the people they were. They're reacting to this crisis in which the world almost came to an end.
Right.
It also is what sort of provides Lois Lane's origin story because that was her big break covering the Kennedy assassination. So I
Hmm.
wanted to tell the story of an alternate universe, but in a way, in a universe that is more like ours than
Hmm.
the official DC universe.
Right.
So it became very much that. It became my attempt to tell a story about the DC canon as it would have happened against the backdrop of our real history.
Hence why Joker's origin, for example, and the way he acts entirely is very different from other Jokers. Like this one
Yeah.
lost a daughter, and now, granted, the only thing that's consistent is that he had a bad day. But other than that, it's way different. But again, just this whole notion about it, and of course, the way he and Batman take each other out, or Batman forces, he's forced to take them both out, was yeah, and then the fact at the very end Superman's able to save everyone except himself, but he gives it to another Superman who's able to care for it. And I just love that saying, like what kind of maniac built a statue of himself? That's not me. That was great. But
Oh,
again,
thank you.
throughout all this, I mean, Mike Allred's artwork. That's one thing I love about it. He's very toony, but he also has that bit of realism to it in the structure. It's like you get what I'm saying, right? Like it's
Yeah.
toony in its aesthetics, but realistic in what's under the hood.
Yeah, I think Mike has a reputation for being really sort of cosmic and trippy and sort of goofy, but
Hmm.
for my money, no one does sincerity or
Oh
earnestness better
yeah,
than Mike Allred because he has such strong, straight lines, and that when characters are feeling something, they are really feeling it
yeah.
on his page, and
And just look
so
at that cover. Just look at that
yeah,
cover.
and this was a rare instance in which our very first choice to do the art on the book
Hmm.
was the one that actually did the art on the book. He
Nice,
was the first person we called and the last person we called, which was great.
nice. But yeah, now of course That's about all that I have. I just realized I didn't grab the Wonder Twins comic. How did that story come about with the Wonder Twins? And it went from a 6 issue to a 12 issue
Yeah,
series. Not
which
all of the Wonderline books did that, so but yours
no,
did.
it sold surprisingly well,
Hmm.
because I think nobody had very high expectations for a Wonder Twins comic. It was part of Brian Michael Bendis when he came to DC. He started his Wonderline,
Yep.
and so he really was really liked the Flintstones, and I got to know him, when he came over to
Hmm.
DC, and he told me how much he liked the Flintstones. So he asked me if I would write the Wonder Twins, which he thought would be sort of up my alley,
Hmm.
sort of rediscovering a sort of lost and unloved property. And Dan DiDio at DC, you always referred to it as "God help us, the Wonder Twins," because you did not see how anyone could make a decent Wonder Twins comic,
Sounds like
because
Dan.
their superpowers are so underwhelming. It's like
Well, yeah,
this
yeah.
this
One
woman
turns into
can turn
water,
into, yeah,
and
one's an animal, one just turns into water. But I leaned into that. I kind of like the fact that their powers were kind of limiting, and that they were, basically interns at the Hall of Justice. To me,
yeah,
that was like where the story was. It's like, well, what about the
exactly.
sort of the B level heroes and villains?
Yep. But and then of course, yeah. Were you surprised that it got extended to 12 issues?
Yeah, that rarely happens. But it did well enough that they offered me another six, and plus I realized, that the way we were planning to leave things after issue six, really didn't resolve the story. It left it on kind of
Hmm.
like a dark sort of sad note. And so giving
Right.
me the extra six issues really allowed me to give it, I think, the resolution it deserved.
Nice, nice to hear that L writers want to go for it and want to end it on a dark note. I'm saying that as a joke. I know there are some writers who do, but hearing that from you, it's like, oh, that's nice to hear that you really didn't want to end it there. But but yeah, then of course you have Second Coming. Of course, that was the big controversial one, and like I said, it goes back to the talk with God and everything. And what was it you said to me at the convention about how you looked at God in Second Coming? To let everyone know what you said, I just
I don't
forgot
remember
now.
what I said.
Do you think it was something like from God's perspective, or we're seeing a human from
Oh,
God from
right. Yeah.
humanity's perspective, or
Yeah,
something
I
like that?
think that what most religions do is they look at God through the human perspective, and that
Right,
God is who you need at the time you're creating the religion. Like for the ancient Jews,
right,
who were wandering through the desert, during the days of Moses, they didn't have any sort of government or structure, so they needed God to be a lawgiver. They needed God
right.
to come up with laws, on Mount Sinai, and to give them order and a system of government. To
Hmm.
the Christians who lived under the thumb of imperial Rome, they had far more law and structure than they knew what to do with or preferred to have. So to them, God was a savior. God is
Hmm.
somebody who will deliver you from that.
Right.
And I think to the evangelicals who I grew up being part of when I was a kid, they
Hmm.
see God as sort of like a Walmart. You know, like somebody who just sort of like fulfills your wishes. It's like somebody
Yeah, there are plenty like that,
makes with the
unfortunately.
treats, the sort of name it and claim it prosperity gospel
Hmm.
churches. But this what I wanted to do with Second Coming was do it reverse the lens, and it's
Hmm.
like, well, this is humanity from God's perspective.
Right. And yeah, and I find that always very interesting and yeah, very clever. Now, of course, you did 2 volumes and you're working on the third one, correct? Trinity, I believe it's called.
Yeah, yeah. The
Um,
first issue of Trinity just came out
oh, it did.
a couple weeks ago.
I got find that then, but yeah, and so is this like? Do you have a finite story to be told with this, or are you still going to keep on going? Or yeah,
No, I
how's
know where it ends.
ah,
So the question is how many issues it's going to take to get there,
mm-hmm,
because the whole third season is something I was planning to get some up in like an issue or two, but it took up a whole series because I felt like the more I started writing, the more important this
mm-hmm,
part of the story was. So
right.
I feel really good about this third volume, and I think it maybe is probably the most emotionally impactful part of the story to date.
Oh, that's great to hear. I'm definitely going to check out because I've read the first 2 volumes and it just surprised me. Like I said before, it didn't come up like a comedy. If there was comedy, I'll be honest, it probably went over. I focus on the characters and love the characters in it, especially Jesus. I just loved so much about it, like him finding out all the stuff done in my name, and went from this wide-eyed optimist, or almost fearing that his father might have been right, to then, but then finally reaching a middle ground of sorts by the end, at least up to where we are. Sorry, by the end of the second volume, and I really appreciate that. This whole notion of, again, like of seeing them as very human. Because yeah, it's like, why do people always feel God and all that are these perfect beings when it's like, clearly not. If he was willing to give us free will, sometimes he might
Well,
realize that might be a mistake.
well, Jesus has a perspective on humanity that God is not does not, because he actually
Yeah.
chose to live as a human being.
Hmm.
So he becomes sort of like our defense attorney. Well,
Exactly. But I gotta say, that cover, that one cover of him, it's walking in with his bags and everything, always cracks me up. It's just that right there tells you all you need to know. And well, yeah, I mean, that's about what's second coming. People should check it out. I do think it's an underrated book that deserves more love and appreciation than it gets, because I think people are still straddled by the controversy that, after reading it, I feel was unfairly given.
yeah, I think that pretty much all the controversy came about before anybody had read a single page of it.
Exactly. It was the
It was
concept that they reacted to.
right. It was from the time it was announced till the time it came out. That was the controversy. When it actually came out, all of that just seemed to go away. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah, and like I said, I love that about the story, that it's this well written, makes you think, and I like stories that make you think. Some people just want a dumb, like again, a dumb comedy, but would you say it's fair for me to compare it to Dogma in this whole movie, this type of story that makes you look at religion from a different point of view?
yeah,
Is
I think
that
it's
fair?
fair to compare it in that sense. I mean, it's a very
Yeah,
different story than Dogma,
obviously.
but yeah, it's true in that sense that it's sort of a exegetical work on Christianity as told by somebody who grew up with a specific flavor of it.
Exactly. But of course, Tristan brought up not all robots. Care to talk a bit more and get like where that story came from and how that book came about?
Yeah, it really came about during the Me Too movement,
Mm-hmm.
because a
Oh,
lot of men were defensively sort of, well, not all men are like, which wasn't really ever the issue. Like
right.
nobody was ever saying every man's a predator. It was just like predation happens, and it happens on a large scale, and it's time we
Exactly.
were honest about it. So the not all robots defense rings equally sort of as hollow. But it really was kind of like a metaphor for toxic masculinity, and about how it all kind of like boils down to us reducing each other to economic functions. That this is what allows, I think, most of sort of human, most of us to sort of degrade each other, is that we don't think of each other as human beings. We think of each other as the economic roles. We think of it's easy to shout at the barista who gets your order wrong because you don't think of that person as a human being.
Oh
You think
boy,
of them as
yeah.
a barista. So the robots taking all the jobs is just sort of like a science fiction metaphor for that, where they
Mm-hmm.
are just their economic functions. They resent having to support their human families, and the human families live in terror of the robots who might glitch and kill them at any moment. And so it
Yep.
really is about like how the cardinal sin, the original sin of like modern civilization, is reducing us to economic roles that cause us to resent each other.
Exactly. And it's just basically like they're basically afraid of it becoming like the Matrix future.
And also just the replaceability, what that does to a person's sort of not only
Oh yeah.
self-worth, but to their ability to like find an identity in society. How the humans have the rug completely pulled out from them when they're all replaced by robot labor, and then the robots who feel like they're the kings of the world then
Mm-hmm.
sort of have the rug pulled out from underneath them when they're replaced by these much more realistic android robots.
Yeah, definitely.
So you
And,
can't, it's like no one wins in that game because we're all ultimately replaceable and doomed to obsolescence. So there's no point in trying, like celebrating other, everyone else's tragedy.
right, definitely. I definitely agree with all that. So now, then you also did the Fantastic Four life story, which definitely, from what I've seen online, I've only read a bit of it. Very polarizing from what I've heard. But where did
That's
the
okay with
idea?
me.
Where did the idea for that series come about? I mean, I know about Spider-Man life story, but why did you chose to go in the direction you took it?
Well, I wanted to take advantage of the life story format to tell a story that happens over decades to see
Hmm.
them grow and change. And I also what I wanted to do was to take a chance to tell the story from each of the vantage points of the characters. So, like the
Hmm.
'60s issue is all told from Reed Richards' standpoint. The '70s is all from Sue Storm, and to really explore them like individually as I tell their story about them coming together. Really, their story as these survivors of a trauma who then through become friends, become a family.
Hmm.
And yeah, I don't really care if something's polarizing. I feel like most of my career has been polarizing, but I think it's better to write something that people are either going to love or hate than it is to
Right.
write something that everyone's just kind of like, oh, that was okay.
And that's very true. That's a very interesting mindset and very true mindset. Um, Again, I skimmed through it. I'll be honest, but I wouldn't. It'd be wrong for me not to bring it up during all this. You also worked on One Star Squadron, which was also a very interesting book. Again, where did that concept also come from? And do you see it as canon or its own little universe?
I see it as kind of its own little universe. I try to like not worry about what's canon now. I just try to tell the best story I can. And really, it was the I had a lot of ideas that went into it while I was writing Wonder Twins, but there wasn't room enough in Wonder Twins to incorporate it all. But it really, again, is about B-list heroes and about
Hmm.
well, what happens, when they're past their prime, when they should probably are long past their golden age of fighting crime, but and they're having like maybe like cognitive decline because of all the hits they took to the head, or they are no longer able to like get work as a hero. What happens to those people? Because
Hmm.
so much of our lives are spent either on the way up, like achieving our potential, or on the way down, declining from our potential. But almost all the stories about superheroes are told at the peak, which is
Hmm.
where very little of our life is spent. So I wanted to talk more about what happens to the heroes on the way down from their golden age.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question to ask. And I personally, yeah, like Watchmen, Night Owl, Community, yeah, very much like those. It sounds like.
Right. I think it's a world that warrants further exploration. And also, it's sort of like a metaphor for what happens to professional athletes or other
Hmm.
people in sort of like physically demanding or jobs that are just worn out by their jobs and used and then just sort of tossed aside when they're no longer on the field, when they're no longer being cheered for. It's like these people continue to live even though you're not paying attention to them.
Right. Very much. That's very true. Also noticed you had worked on Judge Dredd Under Siege. That was a book that I completely missed, but from the looks of it, when all contact with the Patrick Swayze block is lost, Dredge and Judge Beanie investigate only to find it, and it's become a beachhead for an all-out mutant assault in Mega City 1. Yeah, so that's an interesting concept in the Patrick Swayze block.
Yeah, I'm still kind of surprised they let me get away with the Patrick Swayze stuff.
But yeah,
And
but
I
how was it
originally
working?
had written a scene where they're he's trying to rally them towards or not Judge Dredd, but one of the characters is trying to rally everybody at the end. And he gives this rousing speech about this warrior that's been lost to history called Patrick Swayze, who I've recovered some of his movies, and we need to fight like this guy if we're going to save the. But it didn't make it in. But
Oh.
yeah, but I had a really good time writing the Judge Dredd series, as short as it was, and I don't
Hmm.
think anybody read it, but I had a good time writing it.
Yep, and yeah, I mean, how was it? I mean, what's your opinion on Dredd as a character? Because I think Dredd's a great character that I think people really need to see. They need to see Dredd first of all, not the Stallone movie. But
Yeah, no,
yeah.
I like Dredd a lot, and I think what I find kind of fascinating about him is that he is this character who's sort of like 100% bought into this police state that he works
Hmm.
for. He's like fully invested, but I think this is like a very common story. He's almost like an everyman in the sense that like we have a hard time imagining, the world being any other way than the way we were raised in it. and
Hmm.
he's wanted somebody who's like really drunk the Kool-Aid on
Well, yeah.
Vegas
Well,
City One.
to be fair, he was a clone created specifically for this, so it kind of
Right.
comes with the territory a bit. But yeah, so trying to look through other comics you've done. I see you did Killing Red Sonja. That's an interesting book. What was that one
Well,
about?
that one was sort of a spin-off of the Red Sonja title, the main Red Sonja title, which I was writing at the time. Killing Red Sonja, I co-wrote with a friend of mine who I'm also working on another comic with called My Bad, which is
Oh,
sort of a spoof on superhero universe. But it was sort of like Killing Red Sonja was interesting to write because Red Sonja barely shows up in it. It's really about this kid whose father she's murdered, or he considers her to be a murderess. In reality, she killed his father in battle,
hmm.
fair and square. But he is like it's about this 12-year-old kid who makes it his mission to go get revenge on Red Sonja for the death of his father, and his mission of vengeance goes horribly wrong, as you would expect it.
Ooh, right. Um, now when I met you up, you said that Space Age is your last DC work unless they do another one, which hopefully they will. But so you have nothing else planned with at DC at the moment?
Not that's not that I'm signed and ready to go on, but we're hoping to do Mike and Laura and I are hoping to do a follow up to Superman Space Age that centers around Batman.
Ooh, so
So
be
that's
from his point of view in the same
it's
story.
it's one of the reasons I've not been too aggressive about pitching stuff with them because I want to leave a lot of room to write this basically we're tentatively calling it Batman Dark Age, and it would be the follow up to
Oh,
Superman Space Age.
nice. If you were to do one for Wonder Woman, what would you have any title for that one? Because I would think
Oh
Wonder
gosh,
Age.
Underage, underage. No,
Oh,
no. I would call it. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to steer clear of Wonder Woman while Historia is still fresh in people's memories because
that's true.
I think that's so revered
Yep,
that I
very
wouldn't
true.
want to like step on their coattails. So I would.
That's
I
fair.
don't know. I'd probably try call it like apologies in advance for not being Historia.
But I see someone brought up before you've worked on Swamp Thing and during the Giants, the Giant books. How was that story? I never had a chance to get those, unfortunately, because well, my Walmart didn't always have them.
Yeah, no, that one flew kind of under the radar, I think, because it was released both in like giant form in the Walmarts and also on digital first, back when DC was experimenting with those sorts of distribution models. So it never really came out in the comic book shops until it was collected as a trade paperback. But then people were like, "What? What's this?" I've
Right.
never heard of this. But it's called Swamp Thing: New Roots, and it tells the story of Swamp Thing basically taking on uh, this Monsanto like corporation that is growing Terminator seeds, which he sees as like a threat to the green, and also
Mhm.
sort of it explores like sort of greater themes of like how the lack about him trying to like save humanity from itself, and he tries to like create this city, this completely
Mhm.
sustainable city from the ground where everybody like has their own room inside this tree, and they're the tree grows fresh fruit and vegetables for them every morning and spins clothes and like this yard so you can just go pick out clothes, creates this sort of utopian city for humans within this giant sort of tree shrub complex, but people aren't really ready to embrace it because there's not really great parking by the tree.
Yeah, right. I hear you. I also noticed some of the other Ahoy books, like The Wrong Earth. What is The Wrong Earth? What is this
Well,
book?
The Wrong Earth is Tom Pyre's book that he
Ah.
with Jamal Igle on art, but it's sort of a really clever premise. It's the
Hmm.
idea like if you imagine like the Adam West Batman, and like sort of switching universes with like the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight Batman.
Hmm.
So like the super naive sort of kitschy Batman is in this grimdark world, and the grimdark Batman is in this sort of like Batman 66 world.
Right.
It's really
I
funny. I
mhm.
highly recommend it if you haven't read it.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up 'cause I just know it's your. I'm looking on
I had nothing to
Leagues of
do with it, but
Oh, because your name is here on the Leagues of
maybe
Comics
makes a
Geeks.
maybe
That's why.
makes it better.
All right, sorry. I see your name on here. That's why I saw it. I see you
I
also
did
worked
write
on.
an issue. I did write an issue
That's
for
why.
one of the, and it was about the them creating a football stadium in
Mm-hmm.
Fortune City, which is the city that both worlds sort of like happens in,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the sort of good, um, you have the good Richard Fame or whatever, like in
Yep.
one universe and the bad one in the other. But in both universes, the construction of the football stadium happens exactly the same way because
Oh.
because it's just such an inherently sort of problematic thing to build a stadium.
So, what other books would you have I missed going over that you would like to promote or talk about? Because
Well,
I'm.
one that I'm very proud of, which is current, is Traveling to Mars, which
Oh,
I'm promoting or which I'm publishing through Blaze right now.
I see
But
that right now. Yep.
it tells the story of the first man mission to Mars, and the person they choose to send to Mars is a terminally ill man because then they don't have to worry about bringing him back.
Mm-hmm.
So this man's on a one way mission to Mars, knowing that he's going to die there. And the
Mm-hmm.
story is mostly his diary and his about his regrets and all the things
Oh.
he can't do on Earth now that it's too late, now that he's gone. And he also has two Mars rovers on the mission with him who have artificial intelligence and they've never met a
Mm-hmm.
human before. He's like the first human they've ever met. So they see him sort of like a god. It's like and not knowing that this guy was like a pet store assistant manager a week before they met him.
Wow. That's an interesting. That is a very interesting idea for a story. I mean, that's one thing I like to hear when talking with comic people is hearing some of these indie stories that are not superhero stories, but just these clever concepts, these clever sci-fi concepts, and
Yeah,
everything.
anymore, those are the stories I really try to like write. Those
Hmm.
are the stories I really like to develop more. I love working with the superheroes and big two comics, but I see myself as time goes working more and more on these independent creator owned stories.
It's kind of like Robert Kirkman once put it. Superhero comics get your foot in the door, but then you want to move on to do your own thing.
Yeah, at some point, you got to get out of the doorway.
Exactly, exactly. Oh, I also see you did worked on the Lone Ranger.
Yeah, that was again. I don't think a lot of people read that, but I'm as proud of that as I am of anything.
Right. I see you have some covers by John Cassaday, who, yeah, he's been tied to the Lone Ranger doing covers at the very least for a long while.
Yeah,
But yeah, how was it working on with that character?
I liked it a lot because one, there's not a lot of Western comics being published, which now I understand why because they don't really sell. Uh,
Uh,
but in a lot of ways, it allowed me to like. I really like that it allowed me to tell a story that revolved around this really mundane historical detail that had huge impacts and implications for all the people who it affected, and that was the invention of barbed wire.
oh,
About how barbed wire just fundamentally transformed the West and like started wars and really sort of made the West what it is. It really is the beginning of the Wild West turning into the tame West, I guess.
makes sense because really you can't have unless your horse was good at jumping, you really weren't that good at getting
No,
over
it
them.
ended all those. I mean, most of the cattle, what we think of as the cowboys on the range, that was
Mm-hmm.
all pre barbed wire because once people started fencing off these huge ranching operations, you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't drive your cows, over long distances. I mean, I suppose they still can, but they have to go along these very specific routes. It's not like the whole American West is just this big open
Yep.
prairie anymore. It's all
See you,
fenced
Raymond.
off.
Yep. But but yeah, so that's so much of your books that I've been able to find about. And I gotta say, yeah, you've had a very interesting comic career. Just many different books from, well, again, Superman and the others to, I mean, I see a couple of other Marvel books. I'm not a Marvel fan, hence why I didn't bring them up that much. but um, but yeah, just and how if you were to describe your time in comics in general to one sentence, what would it be?
Um, I would probably say it's about a writer discovering who he's supposed to be.
Oh, that is a great way of putting it. That is a great way of putting it. So obviously you have Second Coming. You've been, like you said, working on traveling to Mars, and not all robots. So, any other things you have in the works, or are those are the big three you're working on?
Yeah, I'm also doing, like I mentioned earlier, a third series of My Bad.
Oh, that one.
So
You're right, right.
more
My
My
bad.
Bad coming along, but I'm really, that's probably the most fun thing I work on, because I'm working with my buddy Bryce on that, and Peter Krause on art, and Kelly
Hmm.
Fitzpatrick on colors, which I really like that creative team. But also just because there's it's like a lot of stories. I'm thinking, well, is this, plausible? Is this real? Whereas when I'm working on My Bad, I'm thinking the opposite way. It's like, is this crazy enough? So
I'll
that's
definitely look
good.
into that book too. I will definitely look into that book because I'm just looking at the artwork. This looks so good. What's the monkey with the weird Pope like hat? I'm sorry, I've
That's
seen this cover.
that's Acid Chimp. He's a
Acid.
chimpanzee who's obsessed with like acid, but like all the stores know not to sell this chimp acid. So
Okay,
you go,
you just piqued my interest.
yeah. No, that's kind of, it's like, how could you not read a comic with a character called Acid Chimp?
Exactly, exactly. And Peter Krause in artwork, I back there the irredeemable omnibuses. I can't. I love his artwork. It's so
Yeah. No, he's great.
incredible. Yeah. So yeah, Mark, I think that's about all I have all to talk about. I don't like to go pushing things too much longer, but I really
Well, I think
want to
we're
thank
hitting about an hour, so that's perfect timing.
exactly. And I want to just thank you for coming on, and you obviously promote about your work, but I really hope for success. I really hope you're able to do that Batman the Dark Age because
Yeah, me too. That I'm really looking forward to that.
one, more Allred work, but also just again, this was such a good story. I chose to wait until it was all done before I read it all, and I am not disappointed in that in the least. And
Well, thank you.
yep, I just want to thank you for coming on. Thank
And
everyone for
thanks
sticking
everybody.
around.
Thanks,
Yep.
thank you to everybody who stayed with us
Yep.
watching.
And we'll see you, everyone. I'll see you all on the next one. Take care.